Now, I'm not talking about like the Christmas and Easter crowd. I'm talking about people that profess faith in Jesus Christ, don't have their minds made up on this. They've made a profession of faith. They've done that. They've believed that Jesus Christ died for their sins and rose again. They believe that he is the Lord of their life, but they get stuck for some reason. They don't go any deeper. And for many, maybe most of us, their faith starts with family faith. This was the case for me. Maybe it was the case for many of you as well. I grew up in the church. My parents were involved in choir and youth ministry and small groups. And man, I was at church more than I was anywhere else except maybe home. I was there all the time. So I grew up with this idea that my faith should be an important part of my life. I believed things, though, because I was taught they were true. My parents taught them to me, and I believed them. I didn't have any reason to doubt them anyway, especially when I was younger. But I didn't really own faith. I professed it, but I didn't own it. I sort of acquired it through the interactions with my family, like a child acquires language. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not putting that down. That's an important step, and it's an important stage. Almost all of the things that we believe to be true were acquired that way, at least in their initial stages. However, if you're in that mode where it's just family faith and you start getting pushback from the world later on regarding something that you acquired in your family, and you start to move back from that belief, well, you've never moved beyond trusting what your family taught you and what they presented to you. And what they taught you then can become very shaky ground for you. Now, family faith lasted in me at least into my high school years, when I transitioned from there into church faith. And what I mean by church faith is that in church, I learned the foundations and the background of all of those things that my parents taught me. Maybe you went through catechism. That's certainly a good place for you to have learned all of those things. Maybe you were in a different tradition like I was, where it was youth group, and we learned all of the apologetic arguments for why we believed what we believed, right? And my parents very wisely used the church as a tool to teach me those things, to help them inculcate those things into me. By the way, parents, that is a really good strategy for you to use. We are here for you to use for your kids. So I received a whole lot of instruction on why I could trust the Bible. I received instruction on why I could believe that Jesus rose from the dead. And I saw how people lived out their faith and worshiped God. It was a direct testimony in my life, but it all stayed largely in church. That's why I call it church faith. I didn't really apply it anywhere else. My faith was still a strong influence in my life. My ability to defend it was actually pretty good for my age, as long as I stayed close to church. My anchor points were strong, so I could float, and I wouldn't float very far away. I stayed tethered pretty well. Family and church kept me close. But then I went to college. And I experienced maybe what many of you experienced in college. There was a significant shaking of the foundations of what I had been brought up in. People were questioning ideas. And at the same time, my own heroes, the people that I had trusted in to give me all of the foundations of my faith, were also looking a bit tarnished. And I questioned if what I believed was really actually real. Did I actually believe it or not? And when that happens, people generally go one of two ways, and you've probably seen one or both of these in the lives of people around you that you love, that you're close to. People either break free of their anchor points, and they start to drift away from those foundational values that they were brought up with, or they move to the next phase, which I call personal faith. Now, my drifting never went very far. I had pretty big anchors, but I also never really made that faith my own. I was still reliant on the work of others, the work that others had done in my life. But the big change came to me actually much later in life, even after the college days, when I was exposed to John Piper. Some of you are familiar with his writing and his organization, Desiring God. And John Piper proposes this idea that he calls Christian hedonism. And it totally flipped everything that I understood about my faith and why I did my faith upside down for me. I realized that my faith was very flat, that I did not explore God deeply. And so I found very little satisfaction in him. If you understand Christian hedonism, John Piper says it this way: God is most glorified in us when we are most satisfied in him. And basically what he's saying is we need to go after God with all of our being and pursue him in order for us to achieve that satisfaction. And that will ultimately glorify him the most. And so his sermons and his writings pushed my faith, and they opened up whole new areas for me of the gospel itself. I realized I hadn't really owned expansive amounts of the gospel. Suddenly I saw God in a way that inspired awe in me and required change from me. Suddenly I saw grace as something imminent and absolute, not ethereal and out there somewhere to be, something that it might be important to me someday, like, when I die, then grace will be important. No, it was tangible and real, and it was involved with me now, not later. It was the essential thing, ultimately, that solidified all sorts of beliefs in my mind. Suddenly, the glory of God was something beautiful and fabulous to behold. I was ultimately drinking him in this whole experience. I don't know of any other way really to describe that to you. If you've experienced it, you maybe know what I mean. And suddenly it all made sense because all of those logical pathways for me got connected. I didn't just obey or else, as we hear some in Christian circles say. And I also didn't have to make any logical leaps anymore. Everything was connected. I didn't have to close off a part of my mind just to make my heart happy. And I was no longer standing on sand. I was firmly embedded on solid rock at that point. So I'd moved away from family faith and church faith, and now I had an interactive faith, a personal faith. I was engaged with my Savior and my Lord personally and intimately and deeply. I had, to quote Peter, set apart Christ as holy in my life. And so now I could honestly do what Peter says in verse 15. I was prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks for a reason for the hope that was in me. Now I had a pathway for why it made sense from a variety of perspectives. Now I could answer the big questions of life in a way that satisfied my mind and my heart, and also the questioner to some degree, if they were willing to listen. So, remember that question that we started off with? Where do we come from? Apes. But I realized that that wasn't really the most important question, too. The real question is not, where did we come from? The real question that everyone really needs an answer to is, why are we here?